Shalom, and welcome to What the Watchman Sees, a ministry that will sift through all of the social media noise to show you news of importance from the Most High's perspective. As watchmen, we are here both to warn of dangers and give biblical answers for dwelling in the secret place of the Most High during these times of confusion. Tell your family and friends to like, share, and subscribe as we delve into what Yahweh has for us, the apple of His eye. Let's get to work. Shalom, everyone. We're going to take a slight detour on this session, and we're going to be doing a meditation on a topic that is in the culture quite frequently these days, and it's all about the ancestors. So we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be reflecting on the notion of ancestors from a biblical perspective. This is unfortunately a topic that we don't really talk about, but it's actually with us most of the time. And so we're just going to see what the scriptures say about it. And as always, we're starting out from the perspective of 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, which tells us to study to show ourselves approved unto the Most High, workmen who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And we can use and rely on scripture, as 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 tells us, that all scripture, all that's been written in the name of the Most High, is inspired or breathed by the Most High and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, so that the person of the Most High may be complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. So that's even more relevant to our meditation that we're looking at during this session. We're not going to spend a lot of time reading scriptures, but we do have several scriptures that we're going to be focusing on. But first, let's go ahead and bring up the there we go. The presentation itself. So, as I mentioned, this is a topic that is being talked about in private circles, and sometimes it'll come up in the circles of those who are looking to be spiritual, but not wanting to be spiritual through the eyes of what they perceive as the religion of white people. So let's set the stage for why this is even being talked about. So I understand that, and this study is not actually, or actually this reflection is not actually to come against that understanding, because in this society, the society is operating off of a religion that is called Christianity, and in many cases is suspect when it's laid aside or laid alongside of biblical teaching. So there's no argument that what we experience in this particular country, at the very least, is suspect when it comes to what I would call true Christianity. I'm not one who wants to give up on that term, because I think that it's, as again, what the scriptures say, our forefathers spiritually were called Christians, even though it was a byword when they were called Christians, but they were able to rock with that, and so I don't have a problem with it. But the reason why this particular meditation is being done is because in those who are truly seeking the center of the will of the creator of the universe, that is labeled as the Most High God, and whose name has been written in Hebrew as the tetragram, or the YHWH, if you will, uh, and sometimes pronounced Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah. That Elohim, that object of worship, has a lot to say about his creation. And so I think it's really important for us to begin there as we meditate on where we are with the idea of an ancestor. And so if we start from seeking, as the Most High said in Second Chronicles, if we seek him, if we seek his face, if we humble ourselves, if we turn from our wicked ways, he will hear from heaven, he will forgive our sins, and he will heal our land. But he does that through his word. Okay. And his word is not that which is written down. That which is written down is a chronicle of his word. His word is actually his essence. And he has placed his essence in his people, those who have surrendered themselves to his word. And so what his word has told his people is, first of all, you are my people. You are the sheep of my pasture. And because we belong to him, he speaks to us in unique ways that those who don't know him cannot hear, and certainly have not experienced, because this is a faith walk. This is a spiritual journey that is offered to those who want to know, where did I come from? Who am I? And what am I supposed to be on this planet doing? So that's the context. Okay. Now, so he has a people that he has placed his word in. I'm a part of that people group. And so I'm going to explain this from the perspective of my experience following what his word says. Okay. And what his word has told me in ways that I can understand is that he put everything in me that I could handle. Okay. So all of my lived experiences are actually available for me to examine through his eyes and not necessarily mine. So he's the one that has told me that the lived experiences that I have, the lived experiences that my people group that I come from have, they were all given to us. And he not only knows about them, but that's how he communicates with his people. He communicates with his people through the culture that the people are under. Okay, so that's where we're starting from. We live in a society that is controlled by people and institutions who don't have it as their best interest for us to operate that way. Because if we do, that negates the society that they have built up. So they have placed this notion of ancestors in the pagan category. And that was done purposefully so that we could be separated from a cultural frame of reference that the Most High uses to speak to his people. So that having been said, the question that's on the screen is, are the ancestors back and speaking again? Now, I also have to give the other side of this coin, which is those of our people group who believe that we, and again, this is not any kind of judgment. This is just stating what has been understood and what has been communicated. Okay, so we know that we're an African people, and Egypt becomes the linchpin, if you will, or the hinge through which, and the eyes through which we as an African people see things, right? So that's understandable. And as we look at the cultural milieu that Egypt came out of, which is vast, by the way, that takes a lifetime of study in and of itself. But the notion of how we deal with the eternal is actually found in those relationships that we have identified as being from Egypt. I'm only using Egypt in this sense to say the antiquity of our people that did not start with a transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so it's also true that we tend to make gods out and make godly that which was just human beings trying to make it through whatever dealings that they had. It was both good and bad and ugly, just like most of human history is. Okay, so we should not give more emphasis to the notion of ancestors, and we should not pretend that that does not exist. Okay, so the best way for anyone who wants to follow the scriptures to look at anything, this being inclusive or included in it, is to see these things from the eyes of the Most High. So the question, are the ancestors back and speaking again? That question actually came from a YouTube video that this young lady from Kenya is promoting, the idea that the ancestors are back again and they're speaking again, and we're able to hear them. And if we do what the ancestors tell us to do, then we're gonna be able to be who we're supposed to be. That kind of speaking. So it's basically the ancestors doing the directing of where we should be going right now. Okay, so this meditation is given reflecting on, okay, is that the case? Is that true? So that's why it's called a brief meditation on that which is in each of us. And as we go through this, you'll understand that a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about the ancestors. And since we're living in 2022, we can also look at the ancestors as it relates to what, in a very generic sense, the notion of DNA. I already know that DNA is its own study as well. And I'm not a scientist, and people who talk a lot about DNA, most of them aren't either. So this is not an area of expertise, but I'm just looking at the outward shell of the definition of DNA, which we're going to get into. But first, let's look at what an ancestor is, because we have to start with a true definition. Everybody who's dead is not your ancestor. The definition of an ancestor is a person who was in someone's family in past times. So as much as I would like to consider Harriet Tubman to be my ancestor, she's not one of my ancestors unless she is in my family line. Okay, I'm using her as an example because her name is evoked, rightfully so, as those who should be venerated from our people group. But she's not one of my ancestors. Okay, she is one of the ancestors. She's not one of my ancestors. So again, it's one of the people from whom a person is descended. Now, when it comes to my family, my ancestors came to America, that, as far as I know, sometime around the 1800s. Now, we're still looking at that, but the point the reason I'm bringing that up is because as is the case with many people on this side of the Atlantic, we have been cut off from the knowledge of our ancestral tree. So unfortunately, the transatlantic slave trade is where a lot of our energy stops, because we don't know. We know in a generic sense where we came from, but we don't know where our specific families came from and who they were. Okay, so in this country, that's an issue for us. We're like a people without a history, and that was done purposefully by those who enslaved our ancestors, and it's continued through the systems in this country to make sure that we stay in that ignorant state. So that is our reality. So just looking at the definition of the word ancestor, that's what we see. Now in the Bible, the word ancestor is also used, and it's called Rishon. It's a Hebrew word, and it actually means first in place, time, or rank, which it's used as an adjective or is used as a noun. And it has to do with that which was before time, that which was the beginning, the eldest. So it's the same general thought as what is described in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay. But that's what an ancestor is. But in both definitions, it has to do with our bloodline ancestors, okay, or progenitors. All right. And so that gets us to the definition of DNA. And the very simple definition of DNA is the fundamental and distinctive characteristics or qualities of someone or something, especially when regarded as unchangeable. So when it talks about the fundamental, it's really talking about our genes, that which science is able to detect in our genetic makeup. Okay. But again, these are fundamental and distinctive characteristics or qualities. Okay. I'll have to say it again. This is just a very small snippet of the definition of DNA, because it is a scientific term. There's lots of research being done with DNA. It's very complex. But what we're looking at is how this relates, these two concepts relate, the two concepts of ancestor and DNA. Okay. So getting back to ancestor, when it comes to the King James Version of the Bible, the word ancestor is only used once. Just the English word ancestor is only used once. And that's in Leviticus 46:25, which says, "But I will, for their sakes, remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am Yahuwah," or Yahweh. So again, with that definition of ancestor, we can see that each one of the people who came out of the land of Egypt was an ancestor to those who are well, a lot of the people are the ancestors of those that are going into the land of promise. So basically it was their parents and grandparents. Okay. So what he's saying is in Leviticus, I've made a covenant with your people, your bloodline people. Okay. The ones that I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen. Okay. So that's how that word is being used. However, if you look in the King James Version under the word forefathers, which is the exact same word in Hebrew, what you see is that forefathers is listed in 660 verses in the King James Version. So that's the word that usually we will see. And again, getting back to the definition, the working definition, your forefather means somebody in your family. Okay, so that's how the idea of the ancestors comes in. And now we'll talk a little bit about bringing the DNA part uh, a little bit more in focus. Okay, so again, like we said, an ancestor is directly related to your family line, and your DNA comes from those in your family line. They pass their DNA onto you. Specifically, the father, which is what if you were to do Ancestry.com or 23andMe, there are two ways that they can track you. One is through your maternal line, and the other one is through your paternal line, the line of the mother or the line of the father. So we're going to talk a little bit about the line of the father. Now, as a human being, if we go all the way back, well, yeah, let me just say this. My DNA came from my father, his DNA came from his father, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go all the way back, we're going to find ourselves as at the first time when DNA was transmitted. Okay. Now, again, this is a meditation based on the Bible. All right. So that's how we're looking at this thing, because that's how the Most High is speaking to his people. It's through his word. So the DNA from the very beginning started out perfect, because the scriptures say and said, let us, in Genesis chapter 1, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Okay. So, and then that's what he did. So in his image and after his likeness created he them, male, him, male and female created he them. So what he created was just like him, which means there were no flaws. That which he created was perfect. It was complete. Okay. So the very first man, called Adam, came out or was formed in the image of the Most High as a perfect man. But then what happened, we know about Genesis chapter 3, when the man and the woman ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. At that point, the DNA gets interrupted. It gets corrupted, as a matter of fact. And from that point on, everyone who came out of the loins of Adam, which is everybody else on the planet, this is out of the scriptures. Again, I have to keep saying that. So everyone else who came out of Adam came with a corrupted seed, because his DNA was changed. And it was changed by his sinning against his creator. And that's why in 1 Corinthians, it's in chapter 15, it says that the first man, Adam, was of the earth, and he was earthy, but the second Adam was from heaven. And so now there are two Adams. Okay. But the people that are populating the planet today are all a part of the first Adam, which means that we carry that same DNA in us. Although the mutations are happening time after time after time, but the beginning mutation was when sin came in to the man. All right, because the man actually included male and female. All right, so that corrupted DNA was then passed on to every man after that. One of the things about now, blood is not the only place that you can get DNA from, but one of the things about the blood is that the blood of the man is what's passed on to his son. Okay, so that's why Adam is the beginning of that corruption, because his blood that was then tainted passed on to everyone else. But because the DNA comes through the seed of the man. So our ancestors, your ancestors, received and passed on to us the same defective DNA that was passed on to them. And that was not the case when the Most High created man in the beginning. His DNA was not defective. It was actually righteous. So when it comes to righteousness, we are no longer created righteous. Because we have sin in us. All right. So that's why Yeshua being born is so important, because if we look at his birth, his conception, we find that Mary, his mother, which comes from man, was actually impregnated by the Holy Spirit, which means that Yeshua's blood, he got directly from the Father. He got the DNA that the Father originally gave to mankind. And it was because he had that DNA and he kept the relationship that Adam, the first Adam, was supposed to keep, that made him sinless, which means that he had no defects when it came to righteousness. And because of that, when he shed his blood, was the perfect sacrifice so that we could get our relationship repaired with the Most High and come back into the family. Okay, so whether we do or whether we don't, everyone is an eternal being. In other words, now that we're in existence, we stay in existence. And this gets us back to the notion of ancestors. Yes, the ancestors are still around. But the question is, how is that relationship working between the ancestors and those of us who are in this form of existence currently? Okay, so as an eternal being, each family member has the traits of those who came before in her or his own family line. In other words, the things that our ancestors experienced, that became a part of them, and they passed that on to us. Now, I'm not talking only about medical things. I'm talking about experiences, lived experiences, especially if they were traumatic experiences. So we already talked about the fact that all of the dead are not our ancestors. So I'm only talking about in your family line, the things that your family members went through, the things that your ancestors went through didn't end when they went into the ground, because they are eternal beings. So those things that they experienced have been passed down to you. All right. So collectively, their experiences all are residing in you. Or I'll use my family as an example. So all of the experiences of my family that I am familiar with, I carry around with me. They're in my DNA. So in one sense, that means that they are speaking to me. But it's not some ethereal spook that's doing the speaking. It's that which is inside of me, that which is in my DNA, that which is in my being. I know things through the experiences that my ancestors have had. So I can still feel the whip. I'll just say that one more time. I can still feel the whip. Now, I don't know which ancestor experienced it. I can still feel the trauma that goes along with living in a society that has you under surveillance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's still on me. Okay. So and the reason I know it's still on me is because my ancestors are a part of my experience. Although the Western society wants to make me pretend that that's not the case, my lived experiences tell me in no uncertain terms that's what's happening with me. So I'm carrying their memories and their experiences in my body. So in that sense, yes, they are speaking to me. They've been speaking to me. So the memories of all that trauma of the days of my captivity and our captivity are in me today. And here's how it works. I have a son, okay? My trauma is also a part of my son's experiences, even though he may not even understand that. And my son has a son, which means that my grandson also is carrying around in his 5-year-old self the trauma from centuries of experiences. And part of that includes the failures of my family, the frustrations that are associated with that trauma. When you're in a situation where you cannot win, no matter what you do, because your oppressor is stronger than you, they have more weapons than you, there are more of them than you, you have to find a way of dealing with that trauma. That has not left me. And even though my 5-year-old grandson doesn't know it, it hasn't left him either. He carries that with him as well. So I'm using myself as an example, and I'm suggesting that that's true with you also. So you're familiar with all of those failings. And because of that, and because of the generations that pass one degree of trauma down to the next, we make mistakes because we're more familiar with the trauma. Now, in today's society, they call that a generational curse. So I hope you see where this study and meditation is headed. What I just described to you, I wouldn't want anybody living like that, because there's nothing but pain. So when we see our people doing the things that they're doing, we should have a little compassion, because it's not just their individual failing. They're dealing with generations of not being able to get rid of that stuff. Okay, so we're carrying around in ourselves all of that, all the misdeeds, all the mistakes that were made by those in our specific bloodline. And that's why I keep saying that, okay? Now, the Apostle Paul talks about this. he talks about it. I have down here Romans 6, but I'm pretty sure it's Romans chapter 7. And it's at the very end of the chapter. It's that place where the Apostle Paul says, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things that I don't want to do, those are the things that I end up doing. And then he says, oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? What I've been explaining to you is the body of the death. And just like the Apostle Paul, those of us who belong to the Most High have had that type of experience. See, everybody that's been born has a sense of what is righteous and what is not. And the reason that is important for us to think about is because if that were not the case, we wouldn't be able to recognize righteousness when we see it. We know who God is. That's why he said in Romans chapter 1, his wrath was on those who knew him but wouldn't worship him as God, and became vain in their imaginations, and their hearts became darkened. That was written in Romans chapter 1 is an explanation of the world that we're living in right now. And in that world that we live, there are people like myself, and maybe you too, that say, I know what's right, but I'm having a heck of a time trying to do it on a consistent basis. What's holding me back? What's holding us back is those generational traumas and unresolved issues that we carry around. So the scriptures describe it as a body of death. That's what we're walking around with. So don't trip over the fact that our young people shouldn't be pointing guns and pulling triggers on one another, because they got that from someplace. They are responding to things that have happened before. And at some point, our generations are going to have to own that. But that's an aside. The point that's being made, hopefully you can understand, we're in a bind. We are bound up by all of this trauma that has been going on for hundreds of years, actually longer than that, but for our purposes, hundreds of years. Okay. So we ask the question that Paul asked, oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? And that's where he says, I thank the Most High for Yeshua, because with my mind, I want to serve him, but with my flesh, I'm serving this other entity that has caused me so much problems. Okay. So that's why we should say hallelujah and thank you to Yeshua, because of his sinless nature, because since he has no sin, he was able to sacrifice himself for our sin, so that all of that generational trauma can be dumped on him, and we don't have to carry it around with us anymore. We can be born again. That's what being born again is all about. It's being able to move away from the generational curse and begin a new and productive life in the Spirit given to us by the Father of lights. That's what John 3:16 is all about. For the Most High loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son. Yeshua is the only one that has the blood of the Father, that whosoever believed in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Because again, we are eternal beings. The Most High did not create us to be in eternity full of sin. He's given us a way of escape, being the consequences of being full of sin. Because if we go into eternity full of sin, we stay there full of sin. And so that body of death becomes permanent. And the Father loves us too much to want that to happen. So what he did is he said, okay, I've got a sacrifice that I'll accept, because sin has to be paid for, but my son will pay the price. All you have to do is acknowledge that you need that, and then come on in, be born again, and I'll give you the life and the light that you need to finish your course while you're in this form of existence. And then you become the blessing for your children and their children. And so just like sin follows one, righteousness can also follow, because righteousness can be in the DNA. See, when we're born again, we're born of incorruptible seed. The seed does not corrupt. And that's what we should be passing on to our children. That's what will have our children learning about the nature of the universe instead of trying to find a way to kill somebody. So it's all in the word. And that's what the meditation is about. I think, yeah, we're at the end of it. So the Father bless you and keep you. The Father make his face to shine upon you. The Father lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom.